Hello and welcome to Team Liquid's guide for Mythic Ovi'nax presented by Coinbase. Today I'm going to be breaking down the strategy, mechanics, Weakauras, and all the copious assignments, and let's get into it. First thing that we should immediately talk about is how are we breaking our eggs, right? How do we know where they are in the game space? And the answer for that is world markers, right? So let's take a look at the general plan. This is a full map of the egg breaks, their markers, their ordering. I think the best way to do the world markers is to have one player do one world marker on each set, right? So if I'm star, I'm always placing star in each egg break set, and then I only have to memorize one egg position for each set, right? So 9 egg positions throughout the entire fight. When you're spreading this responsibility over 4 people, I think it's much more manageable and consistent than one player doing all 4 markers like we had Yips do during progression. You'll progress through this part of the fight a lot faster. 2 things we want to immediately point out. Purple and green are always knock assignments, right? So we have a convention where for the first set, for example, is you can see green and purple are 2 parasite sets, right? And there's a parasite set on star as well. And the reason why we are hard assigning people with knockbacks to purple and green is so that that player is always in position to knock, right? If these players aren't hard assigned, that means they could get orange, green, or even orange star, or even the opposite marker, right? So let's say that we've assigned one player to knock purple and one player to knock green. When those players aren't assigned to break purple or green, respectively, things become very hectic and unreliable. So that's a convention that we're going to do, and the way we're going to do that is with this text inside the note. So we have NS start and NS end. You can hard assign players to different markers, right, for each egg set. So in our note here, we have our Moonkin and our augmentation evoker always getting purple and green. And then for star and orange, you can leave these unassigned, or for players that you think might be unreliable with this mechanic, you can hard assign them so that to make it easier for them, they'll always be the same mark and they don't really have to think about it, right? But the main purpose of this hard assignment is to make sure that the knocks, or the players who are assigned to knock, are always in the correct place and able to do that knock, right? So that's just an incredible increase to consistency, being able to do that. Going back briefly to the sets, right? So every player who has a mark just needs to memorize this. Not too hard to take a few minutes at the beginning of your raid when you first get to the boss and just move around the room between each set and have every player place down their mark. Another tool that we have that can help you do this correctly is in Reload's Northern Sky Weakaura pack, there is a map Weakaura which displays the current egg set before the experimental dosage goes out, and it shows you which eggs should be marked with which world marker, right? Incredible hack. You don't have to do any memorization at all. You just have to look at the map and place the marker, right? So definitely recommend using that. Back to the assignment side of things. So we've determined the how we're going to place the world markers, right? Now we need to think about unstable web dispels, right? And this is kind of like simply an ordering Northern Sky dispel start, Northern Sky dispel end, and you list out your 3 healers. For the interrupt Weakaura, this one is general and it's called the interrupt anchor. What you need to do is construct it like this: int start, the NPC ID, which is this and can be found in Warcraft logs as well, and then the spell that we want to interrupt, which is called poison burst, I believe, but this is the spell ID, right? So if you just copy this NPC and spell ID lines, that will just work for you. And then we need to make sure that the worms are being marked consistently with the same markers. If you use the bigwigs auto marking, this will not be the case, and it's just generally going to lack consistency over a strategy where you have the first player in each kick order using a macro that focuses the worm and applies a target marker. So this is the macro that we're going to use. What it does is it focuses your mouse over it if it exists. So the worm is going to spawn, you mouse over the target, the nameplate, you press this macro, whatever you have it keybound to, and what it's going to do is set it to your focus and then apply the raid target marker that correlates to this number. This macro will also not overwrite if the target already has a marker. So very important that you turn off all auto marking. Anyone that has assist in your raid should not have the bigwigs or DBM option enabled to auto mark the worms. And then You simply have the first 3 people in each kick order focusing that worm, and then it will be appropriately marked, and this Weakora will work correctly to show who is what cast in the kick order. And then if it's your kick, then it'll glow and be green and make an air horn, I believe. Important that these people marking have assist. So one more time, this is the focus macro, and this number needs to be changed according to whatever mark you're using for the worm itself. The third kick order is only relevant when you have 3 worms, right? So in this first set, you only have 2 worms, second set, 2 worms, third set, 1 worm, right? And then the other thing that's important is that you need to identify beforehand which worm is going to be melee and ranged. And when I play the video, I'll point this out to you, but just from the top down, like graph perspective, we're grouping the first parasites basically on star, and then we're moving a bit towards green to cleave down this worm. So this worm on green is the melee worm, and then this worm on orange is the ranged worm, right? And pretty much it's the same dynamic throughout the fight, where parasites are being grouped on the boss in a certain place, and then one worm is closer and you're dragging the boss on top of those worms so that they can be cleaved down, right? And those worms are generally going to be the melee or melee 2, and then the worm that's like clearly away from the other 2 worms is going to be the third fully ranged kick order. With that being said, I think that's most of the assignments, and then we'll start the actual VOD here.
Wings, buddy. Thank you.
2 things that are relevant for tanking this boss. You still need 2 Death Knights or a Death Knight and a Vengeance DH to play the fight at this time. Going to be very difficult to manage the parasites without the Mass Grips or Sigil of Chains. And also just how the tank mechanic works and how punishing it is. Very difficult to not be on a Death Knight. Couple benefits from being on a Death Knight: for every volatile concoction, you can use AMS to prevent the ticking damage, and you can use Vampiric Blood to get the shield from Umbilicus Eternus, and you can make the mechanic much easier than it would be on any other tank by fully utilizing your kit. The other thing that's kind of nice is when the spiders are applying the healing taken decrease to you, this isn't affected by Absorb, so you can use Tombstone to kind of bypass that effect and try and remain topped for the Volatile Concoction explosion. Very important that you are topped for Volatile Concoction. It does an incredible amount of damage. Even if you feel like you're high HP, if you're at just 80%, 90%, it's going to deal a lot more damage than it would if you were at 100, and that's just something like you want to pay attention to. When it comes to the dispels on this fight, you should have a Weakora telling you to pre-spread. It is very important that all range do so, and they do so out of the path of melee. The way this mechanic works is if you are immune to the effect on application, the mechanic will poof. So you want to be, if you have a Ret Paladin, you want to be having that player freedom another person before the mechanic goes out. In this case, we do it on our augmentation evoker. And then everyone who can remove the mechanic with abilities like Energized Barriers from Mage, Phantasm, I believe it's called, that makes Fade do it for Priest, Shifting as a Druid, Tiger's Lust, abilities like these. You can see both of our DKs are pre-AMSing it here. By using all of these abilities beforehand, it makes this mechanic poof a lot, and so you have to do less dispels and you're less disrupted. The way the Weakora works is it does not prioritize people who can remove it themselves for dispels, and if you need a dispel, you need to be pressing the macro that can be found in the Northern Sky Weakora pack. On the website link, it shows the macro, and that is how you request the dispel or tell the Weakora that you are ready to be dispelled, and it will not tell the healer to dispel you until you have pressed that macro, and it will deprioritize you if you can remove it yourself, right? And you can see there, our hunter disengaged it, our Druid shifted it, and I believe we poofed the third one. Yep. So we only got 2 of them, and they could instantly break it themselves. Right? Something to note, especially if you're doing like copying the comp with Preservation Evoker, like 2 Preservation Evokers and Holy Priest, is Once this reset hits, you'll probably be watching this video after it, and Preservation of Evoker has been nerfed. So it might be especially difficult to F3 heal this fight, especially during the containers. Something you might want to think about with your comp or how you assign healing cooldowns. This first egg break is, I think, probably one of the more difficult ones in the fight, and that's why you kind of do it first. It has just this triple parasite set, and the triple parasites are actually like fairly spread out, right? So you actually require 2 knocks to get them within mass grip range. And let's take a look at it here. And you can see the hard assignments are working. Razum was assigned green to break, and his hard assignment is green. So he's just going to be at his assignment to knock. And something that's very important is the thinking about the boss positioning here, because you are abusing the increase in mass grip range by targeting your mass grip off the boss. Right, and we get almost every parasite in here, I think. And what we want to do is have enough evokers to assign a spit or a pressing roar. Spit is the colloquial term. To spit every parasite set and then do some sort of stun, whether it's Chaos Nova, leg sweep, shockwave, whatever you have available to you, a cap totem. We'd want to send that stun into the oppressing roar, and then do any other kind of like AoE CEC stop to keep them from fixating. So the other thing that's important to note with the mass grip timing here is you are kind of at the mercy of the star parasites. So most stops interrupt the fixate cast, but once the cast that they do once they reach the target they are fixating is not interrupted by stuns and stuff like that. I think disorients and fears are the abilities that work for the most part. So what we're trying to do here with this timing is prevent them from even casting the fixate at all, right? So you want both of these knocks to go off before these parasites at star have cast fixate, right? We can see I hit it here. I think 2 of the parasites, maybe 3, 4 have targeted people, right? And that's a bit unideal. Ideally, we prefer most of these all of the parasites not to have cast fixate while keeping them all stacked, right? And so what we do now is we oppressing roar into stun. And then these parasites are going to get absolutely exploded if you have a decent comp for killing them, which is primarily going to be Frost Decay and Fury Warrior. Right? And then we're dragging the boss onto this worm at green, which is marked blue, or this is our melee rotation primarily. And then we'll drag the boss to orange. And then I made a call here to put down the new markers, and that's just a general good call to make as well, just to remind people to put down their markers. A good reminder if you want to make a bigwigs timer Weakora tied to it, or a reminder in your note. I think this is a pretty good boss positioning. Something you want to be thinking about as a tank for each set is minimizing the effect the boss model has on people seeing and placing their experimental dosages on the eggs. This is another thing with marker placement itself. So we can see how these markers are placed, right? The best place for them to be visible is slightly away from the actual eggs. So this marker, in my opinion, is perfect, right? So the marker itself is completely unobscured by the eggs themselves and also the boss model. And just the general convention that I think is best to maintain is, where's the boss? I'm placing the marker on the opposite side of the egg if I'm drawing a line from the eggs itself to the boss, right? I'm putting the marker right there. And that's just going to be consistently the most visible. Something to think about when you're going to your egg break is there are 2 valid positions for every double egg. This is position 1, and this is position 2. This is position 1. This is position 2. This is position 1. This is position 2. There are no valid positions here at all. You must be in this line between the 2 eggs, otherwise you'll not break them both. No exceptions at all. Another thing that's hard to intuit is your experimental dosage circle must entirely cover the center of the egg that you're trying to break. And sometimes this can be a little unintuitive, right? So the exact center of this spider egg, your experimental dosage, say but this player gets it, it must cover it like this. And then A similar problem with these parasites, right? It must entirely cover the center, right? And that's something you always want to be thinking about. Just to emphasize it one more time, must be on this line, right? One player can be here and one player can be here, right? Just to show it from this side, one player can be here, one player can be here, right? And that's the only way these double breaks work. There is no other valid configuration. If you get to your egg before your partner, it's best to go to the other side, like the far side, right? And make it as easy as possible for your partner to get to the correct spot. If you are late to getting to your egg, do not try and run around. You do not have time. If you are late going out and the other player is already here, right? Let's say there's a melee coming here, the other player is already here. Do not try and run around. You will not make it. Just commit to the double stack and send your health potion, right? It's a very large absorb when you double stack, but it's just a healing absorb, so you can definitely live it if you're healed. And then if you send the health pot as well, that will definitely make it much more likely that you do live. The logic here is just, if I break the egg and die, we might not wipe. But if I don't break the egg, we definitely wipe, right? So when you're making that decision, always choose to break the egg no matter what, and that's just the way it is. Right, we can see the evoker getting assigned to green, doing his knock, and then we get a very nice mass grip off the boss here with the boss positioning, and then we're just getting aggro of these two spiders. Generally, as a tank, very important to be manually taunting these spiders and making sure you have aggro on them, because melee like the Fury Warriors and the Frosty K's are going absolutely buck wild on this stack of parasites, right? And they can very easily pull aggro and die to the spiders' melees. An easy way to do this is you can make a macro now that the spiders have boss frames to taunt at boss 2, boss 3, and boss 4, and you can keybind that so that you don't have to manually either mouse over taunt or target taunt these spiders. Right, and we're just cleaving this worm down because it's getting overtaken by the pool first as these parasites die, and then we're taking Ovi'nax over to this remaining worm and cleaving it down. And then we're moving over to the last set of the first phase and putting down our markers. Well, there's nothing happening here. These swirlies, even after their nerf, are still absolutely killer because they can stack up and they can spawn under eggs or under the boss. Always important to be vigilant of swirlies. Do not mess around with it. It will kill you. And I say that, of course, that's like a hit by one. On this set, it circles back to the first tank's mass grip. So essentially, you're doing every other mass grip set. One tank is doing 1, 3, etc., and the other tank is doing 2, 4, etc. Right, and we can see some ads actually get not gripped on orange, and an easy way to fix that, if you ever have a couple ads come out, is just to manually grip them into the stack, and they will blow up. And then very important that we're cleaving down this worm that's being covered by the goop. And at this point, we're just doing boss damage and dodging swirlies as we drag the boss to this corner. And you can see the tanks are just alternating for volatile concoction, and we're pressing AMS every time. Make sure we explode when we're topped. And we're putting down the new markers of this set. Having someone call to put down new markers is always very nice, but you could of course automate it with the ERT note or a Weakora. Very easy to die to swirlies here. As you can see, they're spawning under the boss, under this egg. Spider eggs are incredibly deceptive when swirlies spawn under them because they have this web graphic that surrounds them, and the swirlies can be mostly or partially obscured by that. The tail of the boss is a permanently avoid area. If you are hanging around the tail, you will die a lot to swirlies. And when it comes to boss positioning and some tanking specific ideas here, you want the boss to be in between green and star, and there are a couple of reasons for this. So one, you're gripping together two parasites that are on green and star, and then the worm that you want to die first is on green, right? So having that cleave up the whole time for while the parasites are dying will cause this worm to die incredibly quickly, and will also cause the spider to die incredibly quickly. And then the other tank, which you can see is something I do here, is I'm pre-positioning to pick up these spiders that are spawning kind of in ranged. Very easy for the players who break these eggs to get immediate aggro on the spiders that spawn here, either due to healing aggro or AoE effects like Starfall, etc. Right, so you can see I just taunt both manually and pull them into the stack. A very good tank reminder in the set is where to pull it if you're tanking the boss, and then whichever tank is going to be picking up these two spiders that spawn in ranged. Also a very good reminder for the first time you get there, because if they are not manually taunted, they will definitely kill players in ranged. And then another thing to think about is after you do taunt them, you do need to be blood boiling or doing some damage to them to make sure that you generate that aggro during their increased threat generation from those taunts, because the fixate will only last so long, and if you don't touch them at all, other players are going to pull aggro off you. Right, so this worm died instantly because we were cleaving it the whole time, and then we're pulling the boss on top of the worm that spawned in range, and of course this is the ranged worm, and that was the melee worm. Something to note as well is in each area, the dominant ad, right, which is the ad that there's the most of, is empowered. So in the first area that we played, the parasites were empowered. In the second area that we played, parasites and spiders are empowered. And in the third area that we play, all the ads will be empowered. So it's definitely something to be aware of, that spiders hit incredibly hard in this phase because they are getting that damage amp, and they're also applying this necrotic wound to you. So at this point, this is, a perfect place to see in the VOD is I have a 70% healing taken reduction on me, and I'm taking volatile concoction, and I need to be topped here, right? So I'm doing my best to death strike inside my vamp window, inside my AMS, which is preventing me from taking more damage from the volatile concoction itself, and I need to dodge swirlies. And then I'm just dash striking myself back up, and I even saw the Hellstone at the end. And even then, the raid took a very large amount of damage from me not being topped, right? Something else to be aware of, just to scroll back a bit, is as a tank, when your volatile concoction is about to explode, basically every volatile concoction you have AMS up, right? And this is I wiped the raid in exactly this way. I took a swirly here, like while I was in my AMS, right before my tank dot was about to explode, right? And when I would otherwise be topped, if you eat a swirly here, you can take that damage right before your thing would go off and just blow up the raid. So very important that you pay attention to dodging swirlies as a tank right before your tank debuff is about to expire. Right, and let's look at the second set of P2. Top me here, you start hearing. So we have this double parasite, a triple worm set. This is the first triple worm set, I believe. So the thing that you want to be doing here is mimicking this worm placement, or the boss placement, sorry, such that you can directly move onto these two eggs, right? The most important thing is that star dies very quickly. And if the boss is positioned like this and you break all the eggs, you immediately mass grip the parasites together onto the boss, right, to be blown up. And then the tank that has the boss can just rotate the boss and pull it slightly towards these two worms, right, and like nestle it in between here, right in between on this. And then these two worms will absolutely explode to cleave damage. And it makes this set vastly easier because these worms will need like 1 or 2 kicks before they die, and then this worm, ranged worm, especially if it's cursed, will require like 3. It'll be single kicks once these 2 worms die, and then you just pull the boss onto it, and it's very, very free. Right, so you see the eggs get broken. You see everyone focus their worm, and those kick assignments go out. You can see me target a spider there. and then take the boss and just pull it right in between these two worms, right? And then if melee walk towards these two worms, right, to cleave them down, right, any of these parasites that are focusing them still alive will just walk towards them as they die, and you can see that exact thing happening here. And then these worms die very, very quickly. And then we just drag the boss onto this last worm, which is very well under control at this point. And then make our way to the next set. All right, putting down new markers. Getting this boss kind of nestled in between these three eggs. The boss model is covering the parasites a bit here, so a good call whenever that's the case is to say, like, in this case, purple is under the boss, right? Make that audible before these egg breaks go out, just in case anyone is confused, and remove that possibility, right? And something I really do like a lot is rotating the boss around as the tank takes the boss here. To pick up these two spiders, right? So I can immediately hit them with Blood Boil and taunt both of them. And prevent melee deaths as the other tank picks up the far spider that spawns on green. Right, and these are basically in P2, tanks want to be utilizing every external available, time dilation, GS, blessing of sacrifices, anything you have, because the spiders are very, very dangerous. And also again, taking the tank debuff with a large healing absorb, it's very hard to be healed up from a lower HP, so preventing HP loss at that point is very important as well. And we're going into the third area, and this is when we're going to be lusting. You can lust earlier during this container if you need healing, and that's completely valid. It will cover the set that we are using it for. So this is the first triple worm set of P3, and if you make it past at this point and you have a decent amount of boss damage, you should just be able to kill the boss, right? If you break all these eggs and no one dies during, like, to the first worm cast, right, like you get all these interrupts, you should be looking really good, right? And you can see this is a dangerous moment for this spider that's spawning on purple. We definitely at least one of the tanks is trying to taunt it. Looks my co-tank taunts it here, and then I taunt it for safety because he has the boss. And then this is another similar positioning thing where positioning the boss in between these two worms makes them die incredibly quickly, right? I think you could even min-max it a bit more by moving the boss down a bit so that more of it is covering this worm on green so that it just instantly explodes. But even without that exact positioning, you can look how well this goes for us. Right? And you can see kind of there, like, how much faster this worm would have died if the boss was just a few yards towards green. Right? And we're just waiting for the worms to die, and then moving over to the last worm alive in the set. I think in this triple worm set specifically, all worms should be cursed by the Warlock. I think that is just worth it for safety. Obviously, that's Curse of Tongues, which causes their cast to be slower. All the worms are empowered, right? So they're casting much faster than they normally would. In the other triple worm set in the second area, I think only the ranged worm is probably worth cursing. Okay, remember, we're only breaking star. And you can see there as safety, it's always good for people not assigned to a kick to just focus it just in case someone needs it covered. Always good to be vocal in case a player cannot kick a mob, right? Easily covered, you have more than enough kicks in the raid. Just tell people you need help and what worm, marker, and order of kick you need covered. Right, and you can see here's a good example of poor play. I neglect to AMS this dot, and I neglect to be topped. So I deal a significant amount of damage to the raid that I did not need to do. Easily could have death strike there. And you can see how low people get going into this experimental dosage. Completely unnecessary and very, very avoidable. And you can see here the strat that we're doing, because the boss is extremely low, 7%, is we're ignoring every other break but star, right? And this is incredibly easy, because we simply just drag the boss in this worm, and we have one set of parasites to kill And we can just pump damage into the boss. And kind of min-max our space here. We definitely could have moved like here to be much more comfortable much earlier. But you can see with how low the boss is, it doesn't really matter. And the thing you're doing with that is just making these easier. So I would say actually we could either drag the boss here and make it exceptionally easier to dodge the swirls that spawn, because this space is pretty tight for that, or could drag it over into this empty space as well. So you can see I just dead the bosses, and obviously it would be a bit different if you're playing it to the end of the fight. And I'll show you that. Right, so here you can see the last set of egg breaks that we did on our kill. Right, you see this is actually a fairly challenging triple parasite double worm set, right? So very important that you hit the mass grip, kill the worm that's closest to the puddle instantly, and then drag the boss onto this worm so that it gets cleaved down. And obviously the time to die for these ads is going to be a lot different, because this is our world first kill, and the boss has been the HP of these ads has been significantly nerfed, and then obviously any guild that is doing the boss at this point has much more gear than we did at the time. So by the time you get to these ads, these spiders should definitely be dead, etc. But just to show you the last set here, this is also a triple worm set. Very important that all of these worms are cursed if you do get here and break them all. If you get here, I would probably recommend neglecting to break the egg that's exactly in the middle. Would probably just neglect to break this and turn it into a 2 set, right? This is also a part of the fight where you'd be very close to killing it, such that it might not be worth breaking these at all and just trying to kill the boss. If you are planning to play it to the end, would find it very difficult to believe that you have to break this egg unless it's a very, very long straggle kill with very few people alive. But in that case, you'd probably want to break this egg. Fairly difficult to do the triple worm kicks at this point, just because your space is so limited and you're needing to dispel the web debuff and go out into the puddles to do so. Ideally want to avoid doing this set at all, but if you are forced to do it, you'll want to do it like this. It's important that this purple worm, or the one that is marked blue, dies first, because it is going to be covered in the poop and won't be able to be cleaved down from melee. You can see we need people to stay behind and kill it here. And then this is just a very difficult part of the fight when it comes to the webs, because people need to be going into the puddles to getting a healing absorb, and then getting dispelled and coming back in. And this is also the point in the fight where swirlies themselves become incredibly difficult. But like I said, with the damage available and the nerfs present on this encounter now, you should be able to skip most of the end of the fight, and only on the 8th set only play the star worm that's close to the expanding puddle and easily kill it that way. With that being said, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you keep your eye out for more Mythic guides coming out soon. Nexus Princess Kaveza coming up next. That one's going to be very fun. Can't wait to get into it with you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.